In this lesson, you're going to learn about the gerund. The other name for the gerund is the present progressive. In Spanish, you'll hear el gerundio, and you might also hear el presente progresivo. You use the gerund in English and in Spanish when you're saying that you are in the process of doing something. So not only do you have a verb, like in this case, to teach, but you're not saying that you already taught or that you will teach, but that you're in the process of it right now, teaching. So it is a part of the present tense, but it adds more of an elongation to the action. So it makes it a little bit longer and more, as I say, progressive. That's why it's also called the present progressive. So if you look at this English example, I am teaching the gerund, you are actually seeing the gerund in action, adding ing and this construction of the verb to be and then a verb with the ing. To fully understand this, I'd like to do a compare and contrast of what to do to create the gerund in English and what to do to create it in Spanish. So in English, you use the verb to be plus the verb with an ing. So for the verb to learn, what I'll do is I'll use the forms of the verb to be. The forms are I am, you are, he is, she is, we are, they are. And then I just tack on ing to learn. And this is how you construct it in English. Of course, you're familiar with this already because you speak English. And the Spanish is very similar, which is why I make the point of showing you the English. In Spanish, you use the verb estar. Now remember that there are two verbs for the verb to be in Spanish. There is ser and estar. However, estar is the only one you can use to put these sentences together in Spanish. Then you're going to have the verb, just like you do with Spanish, except you're going to drop the AR, ER, or IR of the verb, and you're going to add a particular ending that equals ing in Spanish. The ending that you tack on that means ing in Spanish is going to depend on whether the verb is an AR verb or if it's an ER-IR verb. So if it falls under the category of AR, you're going to add ando as your ing. And if it falls under the category of ER or IR, you're going to add yendo as your Spanish ing. So in the case of enseñar, over here in the AR column, I drop my AR and I end up with my stem enseñ. And I'm going to add ando. Now the verb enseñar means to teach. So right now I'm saying teaching. And if I wanted to put it into a sentence, I use the verb estar. So if I am teaching, estoy enseñando. Now, for aprender, because it's an ER verb, it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to drop the ER, yes, that part's the same. I have my stem aprend, but we're going to use a different ending. You're very used to this by now because you know that AR verbs tend to have their own separate ending. ER, IR sometimes are really close or the same ending. So aprendiendo. Aprendiendo. Aprender is to learn, so this is learning. If I am learning, yo estoy aprendiendo. And here it is a little bit more cleaned up for you and with more conjugation. So yo estoy enseñando, tú estás enseñando, él está. So whoever's doing the teaching is going to get the appropriate form of estar, and then the rest stays the same. You don't have to change it. Just like in English, ing is going to be ing no matter who the subject of the sentence is. Same in Spanish. You keep your ando, you don't have to change it for anything. The only thing you have to change is estar. On the ER-IR side with aprender, this is I am learning, you are learning, same thing goes. You're going to change the verb estar, but nothing else really changes. Once you have your verb in its participle form, this is called the present participle. the present participle will not have to change for gender or number or anything like that. It stays exactly the same. Of course, as with anything else, there are some irregularities, and we're going to go through them. There are three main irregularities we're going to talk about. The first is with ER-IR verbs whose stems end in a vowel. That seems a little bit confusing, but let me give you an example. If you have the verb creer, I find the stem by dropping the ER. This is my stem right here. If my stem ends in a vowel, then it's going to fall under one of these verbs that I'm about to show you what the irregularity is. So again, if it's an ER-IR verb, and once you drop that ER or IR, it ends in a vowel, then you're going to do what I'm about to teach you. Another example would be the verb leer. Leer is an ER verb. Once I drop that ER, I end with a vowel, so it's going to fall under this irregularity. For these verbs, you're actually going to use the ending yendo instead of the normal one for ER-IR verbs, which is yendo. I mean, they sound very similar. Let me say them again. Yendo and yendo. The reason for this is that Spanish does not like three unaccented vowels next to each other. So three vowels and none of them have accents, it just isn't a possibility in Spanish. So if I were to take the verb creer, which is to believe, and I know it falls under this category because, again, it's an ER verb, and once I drop that ER, I end up with a vowel. If I were to tack on this ending to it, which would make it a regular verb, then you notice it's going to be E, then an I, then another E, and in Spanish the rule is we can't have three vowels that don't have accents next to each other. So instead we use this guy right here because the Y creates the same sound as the I pretty much, at least close to it, and it's a consonant, so it'll break it up a little bit. And what we end up with is yo estoy creyendo, tú estás creyendo, I am believing, you are believing, he is believing, etc. So again, the other major example is going to be the verb leer, which does this. Another example would be the verb construir, to construct, because it's an IR verb, and once we drop it, we end up with a U. So these are all examples of verbs that would do this. Another irregularity, though, is with the verb id. So the verb id, whenever you want to say that you are going, because the verb id means to go, the way that you're going to do this is simply by using yendo. So yendo is going to be the present participle of id. Estoy yendo is I am going. Estás yendo is you are going. Él está yendo is he is going, etc. And the final irregularity that we need to talk about concerning adding ing or using the gerund / present progressive in Spanish is with IR stem changing verbs. Okay, so the IR stem changing verbs are verbs that stem change and they end in IR. So here's a list of the examples that you have learned so far in Spanish 1. So all of these verbs stem change. Morir is to die, and morir is an O to UE verb that ends in IR. Dormir is to sleep, and dormir is an O to UE verb as well. Preferir is to prefer, that's an E to IE. Mentir is to lie, that's an E to IE. Pedir is to ask for or to order, that's E to I. Servir is also E to I, and it's to serve. Repetir is also E to I, and it's to repeat. Don't forget that if there are two vowels in the stem, you always change the second one. Competir is an E to I, which is confusing because it has an O in it. Make sure that you remember that this is where its stem changes, and it means to compete. Decir is to say or tell, and that one's an E to I. And seguir is an E to I verb as well, and it is to follow. What makes these irregular is that they are going to stem change in the gerund, but they're not going to necessarily stem change in the same way that they did in the present tense. please keep in mind before I go on that I didn't say any other endings of verbs. So AR verbs and ER verbs do not stem change in the gerund. The only ones that do are the ones that stem change in the present that also end in IR. So for example, with pedir, this one I said is an E to I verb. Now all E to IE and E to I verbs in the present tense will change from E to I in the gerund. So even if it's an E to IE verb in the gerund, it's going to do an E to I stem change. Pedir happens to already be E to I. So what we're going to do is drop our IR. We're going to stem change E to I. We end up with pid. And then we add the IR ending pidiendo. So if I say estoy pidiendo, it's I'm ordering or I'm asking for something. If I look at preferir, this is a good example to also do because I want to make sure that you understand that even if it's E to IE, this is an E to IE verb. So prefiero, prefieres, prefiere. Even if it's E to IE, it's going to stem change E to I in the gerund as long as it ends in IR. If it doesn't end in IR, you don't have to worry about it. Now, if I drop my IR, I end up with two E's to choose from, and you always choose the last one to stem change. And I'll end up with prefiriendo, estoy prefiriendo, I'm preferring this. Now let's look at the ODUE side. If a verb ends in IR and it's a stem changing verb from O to UE, in the gerund it's actually going to change from O to U instead. So in the case of dormir, dormir is to sleep. If I want to say that she is sleeping, we start with our ella, está, and I take my O and I change it to a U and I'll say durmiendo. Here is a more note-taking friendly version of what we just saw. Please note that I know that you're used to in all forms except nosotros for the stem changing of a verb. However, remember this is not the main verb. The main verb here is estar. The one that gets conjugated is estar. These are called participles, these guys right here. And participles stay the same no matter what or who is the subject or what the verb before it is doing. So do not be tricked into not stem changing for nosotros. You have to stem change for all of them. Tu turno! Now that it's your turn, let's give it a try by answering this question about el pulpo, which is the octopus. ¿Qué está haciendo el pulpo? I'm going to give you one example, but what I'd like you to do and try for numbers 1 and 2, the two examples in this video, I would like you to try to write as much as you can about what is happening in the picture. So one thing that we can say here is that el pulpo is writing. So what we can say is el pulpo está escribiendo. I took the verb escribir. I dropped the IR. I added my new ending, yendo. And I made sure to use my estar construction for the gerund. Make sure you do that now for all the other little actions that you see in this picture, like with the telephone and the computer. When you're done with number 1, make sure to come here to number 2 and try this one all on your own. ¿Qué está haciendo la muchacha? There are a few things you can say. She's kind of multitasking. Buena suerte!